Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani, and I have with me in the studio today household name Bishop Mathew Hassan Kukah, Catholic Bishop of Sokoto. You're welcome.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I had the privilege of working for 6.5 years with Bishop as his deputy when he was Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat, and the issues of this country really are very strong in the heart of Bishop Kukah. The issues of education, the issues of our political arrangement, the issues of leadership and not getting leadership right in this country. These are things that have engaged him for decades. In fact, I will say that this issue so engaged Bishop Kukah that he went to study political science as far back as 1980 what? I mean, in the late 80s, he went to do his doctorate in political science, and has ever since then, has been engaged with every regime, the Abacha regime, the Babangida regime, the Abacha regime, and then democracy since 1999. That is why he was highly involved in the Oputa panel, the panel set up to look at the injustices of the past and see how some of those things can be ameliorated. Unfortunately, 21 years after, see where we are. My Lord, you're welcome to Reflections, and let's begin with your homily, the homily you preached at your seminarian's death, the Michael Nadi. That unfortunate incident of kidnap of seminarians, and then only to discover after efforts to negotiate with the kidnappers, only to discover that he had been killed. It shook the country, it shook our church, it shook the Christian church. That was coming only like 2 weeks after the current president in Adamawa, and several others, the ones that happened around Christmas. The Christian church has suffered too many of these things in the last few years. We are told that now we are faced with not only the homegrown Boko Haram, we are also faced with Islamic group from West Africa. What are they called? ISWAP, and all kinds of splinter groups. But the brunt is on us. I mean, we have nothing to do with this ideological orientations, and yet, I mean, to lose a young man, a seminarian in his first year, to die because of his faith, it calls to question a lot of issues, especially about leadership and the capacity of people who are in leadership to superintend this country. So, my Lord, many of us read that homily, those of us who are not there. The point you are making about the political configuration of this country and how the history of northern Nigeria kind of led to what the kind of things that happened. The narrative about the North belonging only to Muslims, as it were, and young fanatical people coming up, and it's as if those who are not Muslims are strangers here. They don't belong here. That was a point that you made very powerfully during the homily. And which agency, but for the government, government is the agency that can actually turn that around. Make everybody feel welcome wherever you are in Nigeria. Maybe you can tell our viewers who never had the opportunity to watch the homily or read the homily a little more about the points you made concerning the need for government to make everybody have a sense of belonging in this country.
Well, George, thank you very much. I mean, you have raised issues that I'm sure you know that we can take more than a day to discuss. But to come back to the question, if I tell you my own personal experience with the death of Michael, some of it I mentioned in my sermon, but it did not take me a long time to understand that the death of Michael was not an ordinary death. And I emotionally repositioned myself, and I could never ever have imagined the kind of reaction that the sermon itself generated. I actually drafted the sermon. I think I finished writing it at about 5 o'clock in the morning, but I was shocked afterwards And I think that if for nothing else, even the way that the country reacted and the international community reacted, I've received messages from all over the world. It suggests very clearly to me that God was saying something. Michael was a young man. He was, in my view, there are other aspects of even his vocation that there's probably no need to talk about, because he was not even supposed to have gone to the seminary in Kaduna. We were supposed to send him to Ibadan, because I have developed the strategy of sending my seminarians
to different seminaries.
Bodija, I mean, we have people in Enugu, we have people in Ikorepene, we have people in Jos, because I think that our church must try and reflect those complexities. But that's really not the issue. It's that, as I'm talking to you now, the good news is this very moment, Michael's twin brother, Raphael, who wanted to get admission to study in Oka last year and didn't get the admission. And I was just preparing for him, hopefully, to get admission next year in any of the universities. As I'm talking to you now, he's on his way to Owo, to Achievers University, where the proprietor of the university and the former chairman of the university itself, and Senator Olajumoke, has given us a scholarship. And it's a full scholarship for Michael to study, for Raphael to study from the beginning to the end of his program. That for me is the first miracle. But even over and above that, it's that the very fact that the death of this young man managed to turn the kind of attention that it did turn. So it just said very clearly that God was saying something to us. And for us as Christians, martyrdom is a badge of honor.
A badge of honor.
And it's not something that we crave for, but every time we look at the cross, we know that it is so central to our lives as Christians that were we to move the cross away, no matter how slightly, or move even slightly away from what the cross signifies, we would
Christianity will collapse.
We can no longer lay claim to being Christians. So the question is not so much what has happened, it is that what is God saying? And I think that the very fact that Kaduna literally stood still for this young man's funeral, a young man that they didn't know, other priests had been killed in captivity, more prominent people had been killed in captivity, but nothing happened. So I said to Raphael, his brother, you are from Anambra State, you're born in Sokoto, go to university in Yoruba land. By the time it's over, you become a complete Nigerian. So even the fact that this opportunity will come to an orphan, for me, it's one of God's miracles. But I think that what Michael's killing did was to also place the predicament of Christians in northern Nigeria in the front burner. And the question that I think we Nigerians have refused to ask is, how did Boko Haram come about? What kind of doctrine are people exposed to that will make you hate an individual or hate institutions or hate a group? And if you ask that question, many people will tell you in northern Nigeria that we have not had a coherent conversation. Right now, in most of the schools in northern Nigeria, Christian religious knowledge is not taught. So the question is, what do children learn? I have an old man, for example, who was part of our community. God rest his soul. He's been dead now for about 4 years. But these children used to come from he deliberately, it's a Fulani origin, but a Christian. He deliberately put his house, among his people, let me put it that way. But what was shocking was this old man became blind. But these children coming from their lessons, these Almajiri children coming from their lessons, will stop in his house and throw stones into the man's house, almost as a ritual. And the question I kept asking myself was, what have the teachers been telling these children
that made
them? Because in northern Nigeria, people think that living Islam is an act of treachery, and that's why you hear people say, if you leave the religion, you will be killed. Unfortunately for us, and really tragically so, the federal government of Nigeria has never taken very seriously the whole question of how do you create a common platform of common citizenship?
Citizenship, the whole question of citizenship.
Yes, and unfortunately, let me put it that way, or rather unfortunately, the British didn't help matters. Because if you go back and read the 1958 Minorities Commission report, you will see that a lot of the things that the minorities said at that time, ahead of independence, was, look, we cannot survive under this environment because it is so hostile to us and what we believe in. Not very little was done. The British left, and successive governments have done almost next to nothing, including heads of state who claim to be Christians. They've never wanted to touch northern Nigeria. When Jonathan goes and builds 150 Almajiri schools across northern Nigeria, what was he saying? Were we in a position to get the president of Nigeria to say, look, can we insist that Christian religious knowledge is taught in schools? So the result is that Christians have often been treated as if they are strangers in northern Nigeria. Up till today, most of the lands where churches are sited in northern Nigeria, we're still living within the lands that were given to us by the colonial administration. Governors are nervous about the possibility of signing certificates of occupancy. You go to buy land, even from an ordinary farmer, and the first thing they will tell you is, I hope it is not for a church. The mention of the word church has a certain kind of resonance in the language of northern Nigeria. That suggests very clearly, that in the ladder of respect and respectability, you're just, as you rightly say, just merely tolerated. Now, this is not strange to us in Nigeria, not peculiar to Nigeria. South Africa was not different. The United States of America, most parts of Europe were not different. The question that we've never really addressed is, how did other countries manage to
deal with this problem?
With issues of integration.
Like you mentioned, what makes one a citizen of Nigeria? Because you see, that whole discussion of citizenship versus the anomaly we call indigenship, until we get it right, so that if what qualifies you to be a Nigerian is that you are either born here or you naturalize through a particular legal process, and that you have equal treatment, not because you belong to a tribal group or an ethnic group.
George, let me tell you one thing, because we are also complicit and we are also guilty. There's nowhere in the world where emotions, sentiments captured in a constitution self-activate themselves. If you look at the history of the struggle for human rights in America, people had to test the limits of the law, because under the principle of what the Americans call separate but equal, towards the end of the 20th century, the Americans believed that judgment, that Supreme Court judgment, suggested very simply that, look, we are separate, yes, but we are equal. But we are equal just on paper. So there were universities, there were black universities, but you made sure that they were so inferior that the products of those universities could never really aspire for a public role in public life. There were, black toilets. The same thing was transported to South Africa. So you might say, but the reality was that until 1954, with the famous Supreme Court ruling called Brown versus Board of Education, in which the NACCP decided that they will test the limits of the claims of the Constitution, which guaranteed every citizen of the United States of America certain inalienable rights. And of course, once that judgment was pronounced, it struck down a range of policies of exclusion that existed, because after education, everything else was possible.
Yes.
The result then is that you cannot even appreciate Obama or appreciate Colin Powell or appreciate the massive strides made by African Americans without going back to 1954. What am I saying? It is that perhaps, if you look at the way Christians have reacted to their conditions in northern Nigeria, schools were taken over in 1970. We did nothing, we said almost nothing. This is whatever may have been the case, General Gowon was head of state, that's not the issue. It is that subsequently, as you know, in most parts of southern Nigeria, out of self-interest, most state governments have returned the schools. But in northern Nigeria, takeover of schools was treated as a victory trophy. And we never went to court, we never contested the matter. And despite the fact that in the whole of northern Nigeria, and I don't know anywhere else in Nigeria except southwest of Nigeria, where there is a school standing that you can say the Muslims of that community collected money, built a school, and Christian children can go to that school, and Muslim children can go to that school, in the way that St. James was, in the way that Queen Amina was, in the way that St. Bartholomew, in the way that St. Louis and all these other schools really are. But our schools were taken over, and as if that was not bad enough, they've all been baptized and given different, largely Islamic names and so on. And I ask myself, whom are you to blame? So I think that the fact that the Christian community has never learned how to resist and how to assert itself and its rights of citizenship. Because a lot of the things that we're talking about, they're all enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Almost everything you can talk about. So
Chapter 2 of our Constitution guarantees our citizenship and our equality.
The Constitution talks, for example, about the fact that you are free to marry whom you want. It actually encourages intermarriages.
And yet,
but we are still living in a country where somebody says to you, no, you cannot marry. If you marry a Muslim
will come and kill you.
Will kill. But again, maybe that is true. Maybe it's not true. Only the law, only the Supreme Court can test the claims of that constitution. So a constitution makes a declaration of intention about how to create a good society. It is your responsibility and my responsibility to insist that we seek an interpretation of what exactly the framers of the constitution meant when they said X, Y, Z.
Rather than just accept that.
So, but we have suddenly turned ourselves into second-class citizens, and we are living by literally living on our knees. And in many respects, we have come to accept things that I've been, in fairness to the Muslim community itself, they probably would never have accepted. Okay? I mean, let me say, and that had a Nigerian president been a Christian, all right, and the governor of Kaduna State were a Christian, when the Shiites, over about 300 or more than 300 of them were killed and buried silently in common graves, the Muslims of this country there's no way that anybody would have gotten away with that, because the appeal would have been that CEO, there is an attempt to wipe out Islam. There is no way that we would have been living in this country and you have a situation in which the president of Nigeria is a Christian, the chief of army staff is a Christian. Literally what we have all
the security.
It will not happen. Before our very eyes, under Yaradua, Senator David Mark was Senate President. Then he died. David Mark remained Senate President. Then the Speaker of the House was zoned to the southwest. Patricia Ete became Speaker. But the rumbling among the Muslims in northern Nigeria was, how has it happened that a president is a Christian, a Senate President is a Christian, a Speaker is also a Christian? That's how this whole thing was contrived, and the impression was created. If you go back and read the records, then the same members of the House said that Patricia Ete had ordered a 628 million, approved 628 million for her house to be
renovation.
Okay, but guess what? That house was actually renovated. Okay, I'm sure you know who now has the house, but that's not the issue. It is that Patricia Ete was hounded out of the house. She had to resign. But guess what? When the 7th Assembly ended its term, the House itself inserted a clause that said that no indictment had been brought against Patricia Ete. But why was Patricia Ete hounded out? One, she was a woman. Two, there were 3 Christians too many. And yet today, we are sitting, the president of Nigeria is a Muslim, the Senate President is a Muslim, the Speaker is a Muslim, the Deputy Speaker is a Muslim, the Majority Leader is a Muslim. They're all fine gentlemen, I know most of them, but that's not the issue. It is that how did we get to a point in which we Christians somehow believe that we are the only ones holding the burden of a united Nigeria? We voted for Chibabiola and Kingibe with no problem, because we thought we had crossed the threshold of ethnicity. Suddenly, this has now come back to haunt us. So I make the point that government may be complicit, but government requires the acquiescence of citizens. If it is an act of injustice, you require
So in the modern society that runs on rule of law and the Constitution, you need people to claim their rights. The rights as already enshrined in the Constitution. You need people to constantly test the law. But that if they sit down there...
Because, look, I mean, it's called judicial activism.
Yes.
And here I pay special attention to my friend, my brother, Femi Falana, who has
done a lot
in the most robust of manners, taking on this whole thing of redefining what justice really means. If we had more people of that nature, and more Nigerians are aware of the fact that in very many respects you do not need to hire a lawyer because there is free medical aid that is available. So what we are really dealing with in Nigeria is an environment in which a lot of very decent people are living with unacceptable conditions. We, like the point you made about indigenship and settlers and so on. The fact of the matter still remains that somebody will tell you the opportunities are all there. In Sokoto, for example, the governors, even before Tambuwal, Governor Wamako said there are no indigens and there are no settlers in Sokoto. The challenge then will be for you to say that I applied for a scholarship and I was not denied. Mm-hmm. And if you decide to go to court, somehow the court will be the final arbiter. But guess what? We are living with a culture of cynicism because the ordinary Nigerian has come to believe that, first of all, judicial processes are too complicated, we don't have money, and so on and so forth. That is why the whole issue of the struggle for human rights. And when you hear some of us acting slightly different from the script that has been scripted out for us, is because, God has been extraordinarily gracious to me. I've traveled the world. I've seen, I've studied, I've read, I have seen and touched injustice in many respects. And I've also seen and I have a fair idea about how other societies have been able to achieve a certain level of what you might call equality. Of course, equality is a vision. It never really happens. But the critical question is that there are no perfect societies anywhere. The real opportunity and the real situation is when citizens feel aggrieved, do they have
any recourse?
And like Justice Oputa of blessed memory once said to me, he said, a man was walking on the streets in London and he saw somebody walked up to him. He said, look, I'm trying to find my way. Is this the way to the High Court of Justice? And the man looked at him. He said, well, that is the way to the High Court. But whether they dispense justice, I don't know. But that is the way, So I think that we need a massive education of our people to appreciate that their dignity should not be assaulted. But our people have become thoroughly cynical about the capacity of the state to act in their favor.
Well, can you completely blame our people? Because our people have had experiences of trying to take on government and being crushed. Cases last forever in court. And then one witness dies, or one judge is transferred, one whatever. And, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, then they come with the impression that there is really no justice.
Look, in the struggle for justice, I always say people have to wear the shoes of the long distance runner. 2, the struggle for justice has no finishing post. And we must prepare for that. We should be in it for the long haul. Because, of course, as the dynamism of human beings is such that you get this today, you want this. You get this, you want this. This is why, there are politicians and there is politics. Because if our people begin to thrive on cynicism, then they will be the worst offenders. They will be far more complicit in their own personal oppression. So that's why I'm saying, for us as Christians, we have an obligation, because luckily for us, we are pretty clear in what Jesus Christ said he came for. He said that we may have life and have it to the full. We therefore need a greater understanding of what the violations of these rights are. So, because if you live in a society where people have come to accept the person in power as, first of all, either God ordained or that there is nothing we can do about it, now that would be the first step towards contributing to dictatorship and allowing totalitarianism to thrive. We must constantly assault these processes. And as I said, activate some of the existing institutions that are available, for us to seek
On
justice.
that note, we will be bringing this segment to an end. Bishop is talking about the need for judicial activism among the people who are occupying this territory we call Nigeria. We have educated people. We even have lawyers. We have people who are teaching in our universities. We have university students' unions all over the place. How are we using the law? How are we testing the limits of the law in our courts to make sure that those who are Nigerians get all their rights according to Section 2 of the Nigerian Constitution? We shall have a second segment of this to discuss further about what has happened, what has been happening in northern Nigeria, and the plight of Christians. I've been speaking with Bishop Mathew Hassan Kukah, Catholic Bishop of Sokoto, and well known for his advocacy for justice and for good governance in Nigeria. Thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you.